Everyone at Blackwell Industries knew one unspoken rule: never, under any circumstance, try to touch Ethan Blackwell. It wasn't written in a handbook, nor displayed in any HR policy, but it might as well have been carved into the marble floors of the company's towering headquarters. Ethan, the enigmatic CEO who had built an empire out of sheer will, was as untouchable emotionally as he was physically. Even the smallest brush of contact sent him recoiling, like a man burned by invisible fire. But that morning, everything changed. Clara Jensen stepped into the building with a mix of nerves and determination, unaware that she was walking straight into a storm. She was the new executive assistant, handpicked by HR for her efficiency, discretion, and uncanny ability to adapt. Clara had read about Ethan, of course. Everyone had. His genius was legendary, his demeanor infamous, and his silence terrifying. But she had no idea about the rule. No one told her, maybe because they were too stunned she was even hired. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like an ascent into another world. The air grew heavier, the energy denser, as she stepped onto the floor that housed Ethan's private offices. People moved like shadows, whispering, watching her from behind screens and half-open blinds. Something was definitely off. When she reached her desk, she barely had time to sit down before the intercom buzzed. "Clara," a voice said, low and crisp, "Mr. Blackwell needs his meeting binder. Bring it to him. Now." Heart racing, she grabbed the binder and walked toward the double oak doors. She knocked once. "Come in." His voice was composed, clipped. As she stepped inside, the world felt quieter. Ethan stood behind his desk, tall, perfectly dressed, adjusting the cuffs of his white shirt with the precision of a surgeon. He didn't look up at first, and Clara took a cautious step forward, setting the binder on his desk. Then it happened. The pen he was holding rolled off and fell near her foot. Instinctively, she bent down, picked it up, and held it out to him. When he reached for it, their fingers brushed. That was all it took. Ethan's body jolted, his eyes widened with something between shock and horror. He stumbled back a step, as if struck. Clara's mouth opened in confusion. I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to." "Get out," he said, his voice low but shaking. "Now." Back at her desk, Clara could feel every eye on her. Whispers floated through the air like smoke. "She touched him," someone said. "Did you see it?" "He's never been touched, not in years." Her mind raced. What had just happened? Why was he so shaken by something so small? But in Ethan's office, the world was spinning. He gripped the desk, his heart pounding like war drums. 20 years without contact. And now this stranger, this woman, had somehow broken the pattern. He should have felt disgusted, violated, but he didn't. Instead, a strange, unwelcome warmth lingered where her fingers had met his. That terrified him more than anything. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. It wasn't supposed to feel like anything. Alone in the room, Ethan closed his eyes, trying to suppress the memory of a different woman, a different touch, one that left him scarred. The past crept in like a whisper, and he shoved it back down like he had done for decades. Outside, Clara sat motionless. She'd only been on the job an hour, and already she was regretting everything. What kind of man reacts to touch like that? She tapped her fingers nervously on the desk. Maybe he had a condition. Maybe he was just paranoid. Or maybe, just maybe, there was something darker. Either way, she hadn't come this far to be sent. Home on day one. She was going to figure it out, even if it meant stepping back into the lion's den. At lunch, no one sat near her. She could feel the isolation pressing in. Even the barista avoided eye contact when handing her coffee. Max, a finance exec with a soft spot for gossip, finally broke the ice. "So," he said, sliding into the seat beside her. "You touched him." Clara sighed. "Is that going to be my legacy now?" "Oh, no," Max grinned. "It's bigger than that. You've just rewritten company legend." She stared at him. "Why? What is it with him and touching?" Max leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. "No one knows the full story, just that something happened years ago. Since then, no handshakes, no hugs, no high fives, not even with family, as far as we know." Clara looked down at her coffee. "Well, I didn't mean to start a war." "You didn't start a war," Max said with a sly smile. "You woke a ghost." Back in his office, Ethan sat at his desk, unable to focus. He stared at his screen, the numbers blurring together. His mind wasn't on markets or quarterly reports. It was on her, the way her hand felt in his, the genuine surprise in her eyes. This wasn't just about control anymore. This was about fear. And the worst part. A part of him, a small, traitorous part, didn't want her to stop. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the office earlier than usual. The building was still waking up, bathed in the silver light of dawn. But even in the stillness, his mind was in chaos. Sleep had eluded him, replaced by memories he'd buried deep beneath years of indifference and routine. He wasn't a man given to anxiety, yet something inside him had shifted, and it all began with the touch of a woman he barely knew. Clara was already at her desk when he walked in, composed, typing quickly, headphones in. She looked up briefly and offered a polite nod. No smile, no words. The usual levity in her eyes was gone, replaced by distance. Ethan frowned and continued walking, but not before noticing the cooling cup of coffee by her elbow. She'd been there for a while. The silence between them felt heavier than the conversation they hadn't had. He closed the door behind him and stood by the glass wall that overlooked the city. His reflection stared back, hollow eyes, clenched jaw, a man unraveling. How had she gotten under his skin so quickly? It wasn't logical. It wasn't safe. He tried to replay the moment again and again, as if understanding the mechanics would dissolve the emotion. But the only thing he could remember clearly was the way her hand lingered, gentle, unafraid. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Blackwell, I have the investor meeting agenda ready." Clara's voice rang through, calm and clipped. Ethan hesitated before replying. "Bring it in." Moments later, she walked through the door, folder in hand. She placed it on the desk, nodded once, and turned to leave. "Clara," he said, stopping her mid-step. She turned, eyes unreadable. "Yes?" He wanted to apologize, or explain, or say something real. Instead, he said, "Ensure the portfolio is updated before noon." Her lips tightened. "Of course." And then she was gone again. Outside, Clara's pulse was racing. She had rehearsed that moment, what she'd say if he brought it up, if he mentioned the incident, if he so much as looked at her differently. But he hadn't. He was cold, calculated, the same man as before. And yet she knew. She saw the flicker in his eyes when their fingers touched. She felt his heartbeat through his skin. Something had cracked in him, even if he wouldn't admit it. At lunch, Max plopped into the seat across from her again, holding 2 sandwiches. "You didn't bring anything, so I'm feeding you." "You're welcome." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Do you ever take a hint?" "Nope," Max replied cheerfully. "So, the iceberg's still frosty." She rolled her eyes but took the sandwich. "Frostier than ever." "That's not what I heard. Rumor has it he asked about you in the morning briefing." She paused mid-bite. "What?" Max nodded, and he looked off, like he hadn't slept. "You really broke him." Clara wanted to dismiss it, to say Max was exaggerating, but something in her gut said he was right. The tension in Ethan's eyes wasn't just irritation, it was confusion, maybe even fear. But fear of what? Her? His past? Himself? Later that afternoon, she was summoned again. This time for a presentation he insisted she deliver personally, even though he never asked that of assistants. She found him alone in the conference room, seated at the long polished table. He didn't look up as she entered. "Sit." She complied, trying not to fidget. "Walk me through it," he said. Clara did, keeping her voice steady, her posture professional. But as the minutes passed, she noticed his eyes weren't on the screen, they were on her. When she finished, she waited. Silence stretched too long. "Is something wrong with the data?" she asked. Ethan shook his head slightly. "No, it's accurate." More silence. Clara hesitated. "Is there something else, sir?" His jaw worked. "Yesterday, you caught me off guard." Her heart leapt. "I didn't mean to." "I know." A pause. "It's not your fault. I just don't do well with surprises." She gave a small nod. "Understood." He looked at her then, really looked. "Do you always react so calmly?" Clara smiled faintly. "Only when I'm screaming inside." That earned the ghost of a smile from Ethan, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "I don't expect this job to be easy, but I also don't want you walking on eggshells." "That would be easier if you didn't react like I'd set you on fire." Silence again. Then, very quietly, he said, "Maybe I did." She tilted her head, trying to read between the lines. But Ethan stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "Good work. Today, you're dismissed." Clara walked out, but this time she didn't feel dismissed. She felt seen, and it terrified her. Inside the room, Ethan remained standing. His palms were sweaty, his breathing shallow. She had made a joke, a simple, teasing comment, and it hadn't enraged him. It had almost comforted him. What the hell was happening to him? Whatever it was, he couldn't let it happen again. Because once you let the ice melt, it's impossible to put it back together. Ethan had always been a master of silence. He'd built his reputation on it, the way he could sit in a boardroom for an hour without speaking and still dominate the entire conversation. But silence, when you're alone, becomes something else entirely. It turns into noise. And tonight, as he sat in the dim glow of his penthouse office, the silence was deafening. Clara's voice still echoed in his ears, soft and playful, dangerously disarming. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the skyline. The lights of the city glittered like they were mocking him, alive and vibrant while he felt frozen. Clara Jensen had touched him once, and it had sent a ripple through everything he thought he understood about himself. For 20 years, he'd lived untouched and untouched others. It wasn't just preference, it was necessity. Because the last time someone broke his boundary, she nearly destroyed him. Lillian. Her name hadn't crossed his lips in years. But her presence never left. He had loved her once, or thought he did, young, ambitious, and blindly in love with the idea of being loved. Lillian had been everything he wasn't, charming, social, radiant. She made him believe he could be soft, without breaking, until she shattered that illusion with a single sentence. "You were never enough, Ethan." She didn't whisper it. She delivered it like a verdict. He'd found out the truth days later. Her affair with one of his rivals wasn't just emotional. It was strategic. She played him, used his heart like a lever to pry open his empire. By the time she left, she'd taken pieces of him that never truly healed. From that moment, Ethan built walls. Not metaphorical ones, real, tangible barriers. No intimacy, no vulnerability, and definitely no touch. Touch was dangerous. Touch could lie. So when Clara walked into his life, with her quiet strength and irreverent humor, he wasn't prepared. She didn't flirt, she didn't defer, she didn't tiptoe. She challenged, she observed. She reached, unintentionally, innocently, and still managed to find the crack in his foundation. Now, He was slipping through it. But he couldn't let her know. If she saw how deep she'd gotten, she'd have power. And Ethan couldn't survive that again. The next morning, Clara was focused on her monitor when Max appeared beside her desk, holding a box of pastries. "You look like you haven't slept," he said, nudging the box toward her. "Neither have I, but that's because I stayed up, binging true crime and eating pizza. What's your excuse?" Clara cracked a half smile, taking a pastry. "Just overthinking everything as usual." Max leaned in, lowering his voice. "Still trying to solve the Ethan puzzle?" She sighed. "More like trying not to drown in it." Max grinned. "You know, he asked about your workload yesterday. Said you were underutilized. That's basically a love letter coming from him." Clara's heart skipped. "You're joking." "I never joke about workplace romance," Max replied. "It's the only soap opera I watch." Clara turned toward Ethan's office door, just barely ajar. Something had changed. She could feel it. Not just the tension, the rhythm, the way he paused when he passed her desk, the way he didn't flinch when their hands brushed over the same folder this morning. Little things, subtle, but noticeable. And that scared her more than his silence ever did. Mid-afternoon, she was called into his office again. No preamble, no reason. Just a note, conference room, 2 p.m. Bring the Lakeview report. She walked in and found him already seated, flipping through a file that wasn't the report she brought. He didn't look up. "Sit down." She did. "What do you think of the proposal from Lakeview?" he asked. She blinked. "You want my opinion?" "That's what I said." Clara studied his face. "Honestly, I think it's a distraction. They're offering volume without strategy." Ethan glanced up. "Explain." She did, confidently, succinctly, without rehearsing. When she finished, he was still watching her, something unreadable in his eyes. "Good," he said. "You're not wrong." A beat. "You're sharper than most of the execs I've worked with." Clara blinked. "Are you praising me?" "Don't get used to it," he said, standing. That was a fluke. But she caught it, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. That night, Ethan found himself doing something ridiculous. He searched her name online, just once, just to see. Social media, articles, old university blogs. He found a photo of her from a fundraising event. She was smiling in the picture. Open, vibrant, real. It felt like trespassing. But he couldn't look away. How had she managed to undo so much in so little time? And why, of all people, had it been her? Clara was a mystery, not the kind that screamed for attention, but the quiet kind. The kind that beckoned you closer, one layer at a time, and Ethan was already too close. Clara had never been the kind of person to chase secrets. She valued boundaries, respected them even. But something about Ethan Blackwell kept pulling her toward the edge of that invisible line. It wasn't just the way he flinched from touch, or the way he isolated himself in an office made of glass and silence. It was the contradiction. The man was sharp, controlled, terrifyingly brilliant. But around her, he cracked. Just a little, just enough. It started with a file, an old merger report tucked into the wrong drawer of her cabinet. A company name stood out, Lillian Holdings. The ink was faint, the signature scrawled with elegance. Clara frowned. It was dated 17 years ago. She wasn't sure why it stuck with her, but the name Lillian echoed. She remembered Ethan mentioning it, barely audible, in a slip of silence. It wasn't a coincidence. Later that day, she brought the report to Max, under the pretense of needing help decoding a financial term. "Do you know anything about this merger?" she asked. Max scanned it, and his eyes flicked up. "Wow, you're diving deep. This one's old news. Lillian Holdings. That was a messy deal. CEO vanished off the map after it fell apart. Rumor had it she was involved with someone high profile. It tanked her rep." He paused. "Why?" Clara hesitated. "No reason." But inside, her pulse was racing. She knew She didn't have proof, not yet, but she could feel the weight of it. Lillian wasn't just a business connection. She was the reason, the one who broke Ethan. And now Clara couldn't stop thinking about her. What did she say? What did she do that made a man like Ethan build an empire out of ice? Meanwhile, Ethan was unraveling, slowly, carefully, but undeniably. He found himself hovering near Clara's desk more often, under the guise of needing updates, but it wasn't about work. He was watching her, cataloguing the way she ran her fingers along the rim of her coffee mug when she was thinking, the way she tilted her head when reading. It was wrong, inappropriate, but he couldn't stop. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, Ethan walked past her desk and saw her there, headphones in, typing furiously. She didn't notice him at first. He lingered, just for a second too long. Then she looked up. Their eyes locked. She pulled out one earbud. "Working late too?" she asked. He cleared his throat. "Just checking the numbers for tomorrow's acquisition brief." A pause. "You should go home." Clara shrugged. "I like the quiet." Ethan hesitated. "So do I." For a moment, neither of them moved. The tension between them felt alive, buzzing under the fluorescence. Clara stood up, walking slowly around her desk. "Is everything okay?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Why do you stay?" he said instead. "Here, working with me, after everything," she blinked. "Because I see something in you that I don't think you see in yourself." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Ethan felt them settle in his chest, warm and terrifying. He didn't know how to reply, so he didn't. He just turned and walked away. Back in his apartment that night, Ethan stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, drink in hand, shirt collar undone. The city was alive below him. He was not. Clara's voice wouldn't leave his mind. "I see something in you." How dare she? How dare she look at him like he was still worth something, still whole? Clara, on the other hand, was doing her own digging. She stayed up late researching, not for gossip, for understanding. She needed to know what made a man seal himself off from the world. She found an old article, nearly buried. "Lillian Roth steps down after Scandal Rock's tech merger." No names mentioned, but a photo showed her beside a younger Ethan. They weren't smiling. They were on the brink of something, maybe love, maybe destruction. The next day, Clara said nothing. She kept her head down, answered emails, scheduled meetings. But Ethan noticed the shift. The silence wasn't comfortable anymore. It was heavy, measured. He cornered her after a team debriefing. "Is something wrong?" She looked up at him, carefully neutral. "You tell me." "I don't play games." "Good," she said softly, "because neither do I." Then she walked away, and Ethan felt something like dread settle into his bones. She was getting too close. She was peeling back layers he had locked behind steel doors. If she found the truth, she'd leave. They always did. But Clara wasn't walking away yet. She was walking straight toward the fire, and she didn't even know it. It started with a storm. The skies over the city had been clear that morning. But by early afternoon, clouds gathered like an omen. Thunder rolled, distant and low, as if the universe was clearing its throat. Inside Blackwell Industries, the lights flickered once, then steadied. And with them, so did Clara's resolve. She wasn't backing off anymore, not from Ethan. Not from the questions that clawed at her since the moment she touched his skin and saw him tremble like a man haunted. Ethan was in a rare mood, not cold, but distracted. He stood during the weekly executive meeting, pacing instead of sitting, his thoughts scattered across multiple topics. He stopped mid-sentence twice, then waved the meeting off abruptly, leaving half the board stunned. Clara watched him through the glass as he returned to his office and slammed the door. Something was brewing inside him, and she knew it wouldn't stay locked up much longer. An hour later, his secretary relayed a message. Mr. Blackwell would like you to accompany him to the off-site inspection. Clara frowned. Inspection? The secretary shrugged. He didn't explain, just asked for you specifically. It was unusual. Ethan never brought assistants to these inspections, but Clara knew better than to say no. She grabbed her coat, her tablet, and her sense of caution and followed him downstairs to the black car waiting out front. The ride was silent. Rain tapped against the windows, and Ethan stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, hands resting still on his knees. Clara kept her eyes on her tablet, but didn't read a word. After 15 minutes, she couldn't stand the tension. "You're quieter than usual," she said. "Did something happen?" He didn't look at her. "Not everything needs to be explained." "You brought me with you. That's not exactly your style." That made him glance her way, brief, sharp. "Maybe I needed someone who doesn't. Expect rehearsed answers." Clara met his gaze evenly. "And what do you expect from me?" Ethan's lips parted, then closed. No answer, just more silence. The car pulled up to a high-rise in Midtown. It was one of the company's older acquisitions, currently under renovation. They entered through a back service entrance. The interior was half-lit, echoing with drills and the hum of construction. A site manager greeted them with hard hats and apologies. "Power's acting up. Generators are spotty today. Elevators down. We'll have to take the stairs, unfortunately." Ethan didn't react. He took the stairs 2 at a time, Clara following behind, breath catching by the 4th floor. They stopped at the 8th, the manager opening the door to a nearly gutted floor. "You wanted to see the redesign progress," he explained. Ethan walked slowly through the room, observing. Clara trailed behind, still watching him. He seemed calm now, almost serene, until, without warning, the lights cut out completely. A crack of thunder shook the windows, and the floor went black. "What the—" Clara began, before the door slammed shut behind them. "Power's out!" the manager called. "Sorry, I'll get the generator up. Don't move!" Ethan stood still, his outline barely visible. "Clara," he said, voice steady but low, "don't come closer." "It's dark," she replied. "I can't see anything." "Exactly. Stay where you are." His voice had that edge again, the one she remembered from the first day, fear, tightly wound in control. But Clara didn't listen. She moved slowly, carefully. "Ethan, it's just the dark. I'm not going to hurt you." "You don't understand," he said, and there it was again, that tremor in his voice. "You shouldn't be here." Clara kept walking. "Then tell me why." Silence. Then, just a whisper, "Because I don't want to feel again, and you make me feel everything." Her breath caught. She stopped, inches away now. She reached out in the dark and found his hand. He flinched, hard, but this time he didn't pull away. Her fingers closed around his, gently. "I'm not her, Ethan," she said. "I'm not going to disappear when things get hard." Lightning illuminated the room briefly, just long enough for her to see the war happening in his eyes. And then, without a word, he squeezed her hand back. The lights flickered on. They both stood there, exposed, breathless. Ethan let go first and turned away. "We should go," he said. But his voice was different now, tired, honest. Clara followed him down the stairs, the silence no longer oppressive, just fragile. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing. The walls Ethan Blackwell spent years building had just cracked, and cracks eventually give way. Ethan had always believed that silence was strength, that words, once spoken, became weaknesses to be used against you. So he built his empire with quiet. He negotiated billion-dollar contracts with fewer syllables than most men used to order coffee. But now, the silence he used as armor was starting to choke him. Because Clara Jensen didn't play by his rules. She asked, she watched, And worst of all, she waited. The day after the storm, Ethan stayed in his office longer than usual. Meetings were rescheduled. Calls went unanswered. He stood at the window again, trying to make sense of what had happened. Clara had touched him, again, and he didn't recoil. He didn't collapse. The world didn't end. In fact, it had felt grounding, and that terrified him, because the last time someone's touch had grounded him, they ended up burying him instead. Meanwhile, Clara sat at her desk like any other day. On the surface, she was composed, answering emails, adjusting schedules, preparing briefs, but her mind was nowhere near the spreadsheets in front of her. Her thoughts were in that half-lit room where Ethan held her hand and didn't let go. Something shifted in him. She knew it, felt it, and it wasn't over. Whatever he thought he was protecting by pushing her away was breaking apart from the inside. By noon, she couldn't take it anymore. She stood, walked to his office, and knocked. One beat, then two. "Come in." Ethan's voice was low, unreadable. She entered and closed the door behind her. He looked up from his desk, not surprised, to see her. Not this time. "We need to talk," she said. He nodded once. "I figured." Clara sat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. The air was thick with all the things they weren't saying. Then she broke the silence. "You don't get to pull me in and push me away on a whim, Ethan. You don't get to ask for my hand in the dark and act like nothing happened the next day." His gaze sharpened. "It wasn't about you. I wasn't thinking." "Exactly," she said, leaning forward. "That's the point. You weren't thinking. You were feeling." He looked away. That was always his move. Retreat. Clara didn't let him. "I know about Lillian," she said softly. That made him still. Completely. His eyes returned to hers, guarded but burning. "What did you say?" "I know," she repeated. "About the merger, about how she left, how she used you." Ethan stood abruptly, as if the chair had become unbearable. "You had no right to dig into that." "Maybe not," Clara replied, standing too. "But I wasn't digging for dirt. I was looking for understanding, because I've watched you drown in silence, and I refuse to let you drag me under with you." He exhaled harshly, walking to the window. "You think you understand because you found a few old headlines?" "No," she said. "I understand because I've been hurt too." That made him pause. "I know what it's like to give someone everything, only to have them turn it into a weapon," Clara continued. "I know how easy it is to build a wall and call it safety, but that's not living, Ethan. That's hiding." He turned back to her, and for the first time, there was no coldness in his expression. Just exhaustion. "I can't be that vulnerable again." "You already are," Clara said quietly. "That night, when you didn't pull away, when you squeezed my hand, that was vulnerability." Ethan said nothing, but his silence was different now, not defensive, but exposed. "I'm not asking for everything," Clara added. "I'm just asking for honesty." Ethan looked at her for a long time. Then finally, he said the words that had been burning his throat for weeks. "You scare me." Clara blinked. "Why?" "Because you make me want something I promised myself I'd never want again." She stepped closer. "Then maybe it's time to break that promise." For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then he reached for her. Not impulsively, not accidentally. He touched her hand deliberately, his fingers resting over hers. It wasn't passion. It wasn't a kiss. But it was a start. A choice. They stood there, quiet and unmoving, but everything had changed. And for Ethan Blackwell, that was the most terrifying revelation of all. It was a quiet Friday afternoon when the message arrived. Clara had just returned to her desk from a department check-in when Ethan's voice filtered through her phone, composed as ever. Join me for dinner, 7 o'clock. Dress accordingly. No context, no subject line, no details, just a command, not a request. Clara stared at the phone for a long time before responding with a single word. Okay. She wasn't sure what accordingly meant. Formal, casual, romantic, it didn't matter. She picked a dark green dress that hugged her just enough, paired it with heels and quiet confidence. When Ethan pulled up outside her apartment, she half expected a driver, not the man himself, in a sleek black suit, standing beside the car like he wasn't the same person who once fled from her touch. "Clara," he greeted. Just her name, but the way he said it had weight. She nodded. "Ethan." The ride to the restaurant was smooth, quiet. Not awkward, just full. Every unspoken thought hung in the air between them. When they arrived at the rooftop venue, Clara realized this wasn't business. Not really. There were no folders, no investor handshakes, no staged small talk. Just the two of them, seated at a private table under warm lantern light and a canopy of stars. Ethan didn't speak for a while. He watched her. Not in the usual, cold, assessing way. Tonight his gaze was different. Curious, reverent even. Clara felt her guard lowering. She hated that. "You're being quiet," she said eventually. "That's new." Ethan allowed a faint smile. "You make it difficult to hide." That caught her off guard. Hide what? Everything. They ordered. The food was elegant and unnecessary. The kind of dishes no one remembered the next day. What Clara remembered was the way Ethan's fingers trembled slightly when he reached for his glass. "Are you nervous?" she asked. He didn't deny it. "Yes. Because of me." "Because of this," he clarified. "Because it feels like something I can't control." Clara leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Control is overrated." Ethan shook his head. "Control is survival." "No," she countered. "It's loneliness dressed up in expensive suits." For once he didn't argue, just stared at her like she'd said something he wasn't ready to admit. Halfway through the meal, the atmosphere shifted. It happened gradually, the way intimacy always does. One minute, they were discussing past books and forgotten vacations. The next, Clara found herself talking about her father, about how he left when she was 9, how she stopped trusting people who smiled too easily. Ethan listened, truly listened, and that did more to break her down than any romantic gesture ever could. When the check came, Ethan didn't move to pay. He didn't reach for his wallet. Instead, he said, "Thank you for trusting me with that." Clara blinked. "It wasn't a strategy. I just needed someone to know." "I know," he said, voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "And I'll carry it carefully." They didn't drive straight home. Instead, Ethan pulled into a quiet overlook above the river. City lights shimmered in the distance, their reflections broken by slow waves. Clara stepped out, hugging her arms against the cool wind. Ethan joined her, standing close but not touching. "Do you ever think about what you'd be if everything hadn't gone wrong?" he asked. "All the time," Clara replied. "But then I remember, the people who broke me aren't the ones who built me." Ethan nodded slowly. "I'm not good at this." "Neither am I," she said, smiling. "But maybe that's exactly why we should try." He turned to her then. There was a question in his eyes, not lust, not impulse, a request for permission, and when Clara nodded, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost uncertain, then it deepened, slow, deliberate, electric. He tasted like resolve and regret. She kissed him back like she was trying to rewrite his story with her breath. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan looked terrified. "That was probably a mistake," he said. "Or," Clara whispered, "it's the first honest thing we've done." They didn't speak much on the way back, but Ethan didn't drop her at her apartment door and drive off. He waited, watched, and Clara understood. This wasn't the end of something, it was the start. It started with a photo. Monday morning arrived with a different kind of energy. Clara felt it the moment. She walked into the building, whispers in the air, glances thrown sideways, phones half hidden in palms. She thought it was her imagination until Max rushed to her desk, unusually pale. "Have you seen it?" he asked. "Seen what?" Clara blinked. Max turned his phone toward her. On the screen was a headline. "Reclusive billionaire Ethan Blackwell. Spotted with mystery woman. Is the Ice King melting?" Below the title was a photo of them, Ethan and Clara, on the rooftop, mid-laugh, glasses in hand. Clara's stomach dropped. Her breath caught, and for a second, she couldn't hear anything. "Where did they get this?" she asked. "Someone at the restaurant, probably," Max said. "It's already making rounds. Finance blogs, gossip sites, hell, even Twitter." Clara stood abruptly. "Where is he?" Max didn't answer. He didn't need to. Clara was already storming toward Ethan's office. She didn't knock. She walked in like a force of nature. Ethan looked up, his face unreadable, cold again, just like before. The wall was back. "You knew," she said. "You knew this was going to happen." "I suspected," Ethan replied. "We were in public. Someone recognized me." "And you didn't warn me?" she snapped. "Didn't give me a chance to prepare?" Ethan stood slowly. "What did you expect? That no one would notice? That I could hide you in plain sight forever?" "No," Clara said, her voice cracking, "but I expected you to act like it mattered, like I mattered." For the briefest second, his mask slipped. Pain, regret, fear. Then it was gone. "I told you this would get complicated," he said. "This is why I keep people out." Clara's chest tightened. "No, Ethan, you keep people out because you're afraid of being seen, and the minute someone does, you run." He stepped around his desk. "You don't understand." "No," she interrupted. "You don't. You kissed me. You asked for this. And the second it stopped being convenient, you buried it like everything else." He didn't respond. Because what could he say that wouldn't prove her right? Clara turned to leave. "Don't worry. I'll handle the PR fallout. It's what good assistants do, right?" She was gone before he could stop her. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Clara worked mechanically, responding to emails, issuing quiet press guidelines, crafting a vague internal memo to address recent media attention. She didn't cry, she didn't break, but inside something was shattering, not just because of Ethan's retreat, but because she'd let herself believe it was different. Ethan, meanwhile, sat in his office long after everyone had gone. The lights were off. His phone buzzed with unread messages. His inbox was filled with media inquiries. But all he could think about was her voice, the way it trembled when she said, "Like I mattered." She did matter. That was the problem. He poured himself a drink, neat, expensive, untouched. He sat on the edge of the couch and stared at it. What had he done? He let her in. He cracked open the vault that kept him protected. And now the world had seen. Now she'd seen what he really was. Not powerful, not fearless, just a man, too. Broken, to be honest. Somewhere between midnight and 3 a.m., he sent a message, just one line, "I didn't mean to hurt you." Clara read it, alone in her apartment, wrapped in silence. She didn't respond. The next day, they spoke only in necessity. Reports, briefs, logistics. Their hands never touched. Their eyes barely met. But every word carried weight. Every silence dragged between them like a chain. At the end of the week, a gift arrived on Clara's desk. No card, just a first-edition book of poetry she once mentioned in passing. Something rare, something impossible to find. It wasn't romantic, it was precise. It said, "I see you." She placed it back in the box and locked it in a drawer. Because love wasn't a gesture, it was a choice. And Ethan Blackwell hadn't made his yet. Ethan stood in the center of the boardroom, staring at the glass walls that reflected every angle of his indecision. The press coverage hadn't stopped. In fact, it had escalated. Headlines speculated everything, from office romance to internal scandal. Investors were beginning to ask questions. The board was losing patience, and for the first time in a decade, Ethan Blackwell didn't have a clean solution. "You need to address it," Arthur Leeds, the COO, said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Make a statement, confirm or deny. Clarity calms markets." Ethan didn't respond. Arthur sighed. "If this continues, Clara will be the one dragged through the mud, not you." That landed like a punch. Ethan's jaw tightened. "She's not the problem," he said. "Then fix it," Arthur replied, "before someone else does it for you." Clara was already packing her things, not because she'd been fired. No, Ethan would never be that cowardly. But because staying had become impossible. She couldn't sit behind that desk and pretend nothing had happened. She couldn't smile politely while her name was whispered in boardroom corners. Ethan hadn't said a word since his late-night message, and that silence spoke volumes. Max found her halfway through emptying her drawers. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Leaving before they can ask me to," she replied. "You're not disposable, Clara." "No," she said, but I'm inconvenient, and Ethan Blackwell doesn't do inconvenient." Max was quiet for a moment. Then gently, "You know he's just scared, right?" Clara froze. "I'm scared too," she whispered. "But I stayed." She looked at Max, eyes steady. He didn't. That afternoon, the company released a brief press statement. Cold, professional. Blackwell Industries does not comment on personal matters involving staff members. Our focus remains on delivering value to our clients and stakeholders. Clara read it on her phone while riding the elevator down. No mention of her. No denial, no truth. Just a blanket of silence to cover what had never been admitted. Outside, the rain had returned. She stepped into it without an umbrella, letting it wash over her like absolution. One step away from the building, then another. She didn't turn around. Ethan stood at the window watching her leave. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. Arthur entered the office behind him. "She's gone." Ethan didn't reply. "And if you don't go after her now, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." He turned slowly. "It's not that simple." "It never is," Arthur said. "But the right things rarely are." That night, Ethan found himself at Clara's apartment building. He didn't remember making the decision. One minute he was in his car, the next he was standing in the rain, looking up at the window he wasn't sure belonged to her. He didn't know what he'd say. He just knew he couldn't stay silent anymore. He buzzed. Once, twice, no answer. Then the door opened. Clara stood in the hallway barefoot, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know. I don't want another apology," she added. "I'm not here to apologize." A pause. "I'm here to tell the truth." She folded her arms. "Then say it." Ethan took a breath. "I was afraid of what it meant to feel something real, to be seen, to want someone who could leave." "I never planned to leave," Clara said, softly. "But you made it impossible to stay." "I know," he said, "and I hate myself for it." She looked at him for a long time. Then, without a word, she stepped aside. Ethan walked in, soaked to the bone. Clara handed him a towel and sat across from him on the couch. "What now?" she asked. He met her eyes. "I don't want to hide anymore." "Then don't," she replied. And just like that, for the first time in 20 years, Ethan Blackwell made a choice that wasn't about control or power or safety. He chose her. The silence in Clara's apartment wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was charged, expectant. Ethan sat across from her, the towel draped over his shoulders, his hair still damp from the rain. His posture was relaxed for the first time she could remember. No stiffness, no calculated tension, just exhaustion and surrender. Clara didn't press. She simply sat with him, letting the quiet speak for them both. "I used to imagine this," Ethan said finally, voice low. "Being here, saying what I couldn't say in the office." Clara tilted her head. "And what did you imagine happening?" "This," he replied. "The silence. You not yelling. Just being." She smiled faintly. "You're lucky I'm too tired to yell." "Or," he said, "you're the only person who doesn't need to." Something in the air shifted again. He reached for her hand, slowly, deliberately. And this time there was no flinch, no hesitation. Clara interlaced her fingers with his, and the contact felt like a promise. He leaned in, unsure, still fragile in this new territory. "Can I?" he asked. She nodded before he finished the sentence. The kiss was soft, a whisper of all the things neither had ever said aloud. Ethan's hands moved up to her face, then to her waist, every movement careful, reverent. Clara responded with equal weight, not desperation, not hunger, but certainty. This wasn't a game. It wasn't strategy. It was real. Hours later, the bedroom was lit only by the dim glow of streetlights beyond the curtains. They lay side by side, skin brushing, breathing in sync. Ethan stared at the ceiling, his expression unreadable. Clara watched him. "Say something," she whispered. "I'm trying to memorize this," he murmured, "in case I ruin it." "You will," she said without malice. "So will I. That's not the point." He looked at her. "Then what is?" "That we keep showing up," she answered, "even when we're scared, especially when we're scared." He kissed her again, slower this time, and the moment stretched into morning. But mornings always come with light and reality. Clara awoke first. Ethan was still asleep beside her, his features softer than she'd ever seen them. For a moment, she let herself pretend this was normal, waking next to someone who loved her. But then her phone buzzed on the nightstand, dozens of missed emails. One subject line stood out: board meeting, urgent. She sat up, heart racing. The company, the leak, the fallout. She hadn't thought about any of it last night. She glanced at Ethan, who was now stirring. "Something wrong?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately, just passed him her phone. He read the message, said nothing. "Do you think they'll try to push you out?" she asked. "They won't succeed," he replied, "but they'll try." "And me?" "They'll come for you first," Ethan said plainly. "They'll paint you as reckless, opportunistic, and if I don't say anything, they'll believe it." Clara stood, pulling the blanket around her. "So say something." "I will," he said, "but it won't fix everything." She turned to face him. "I don't need you to fix it. I need you to stop pretending we didn't choose this." Ethan sat up. "You think I'm pretending?" "I think you're used to damage control. I think it's easier for you to erase than to admit." He stood now, too, steps closing the distance between them. "You think I could erase you?" "I think you've done it before," she said. "To people who mattered, to people like Lillian." Ethan froze. The name hung in the room like a ghost. "You are not her," he said finally. "No," Clara replied, "but you still react like I am." The moment cracked. Not a break. Not yet. But a fracture deep enough to feel. Ethan walked to the window, running a hand through his hair. "Then tell me what to do." Clara stepped behind him. "Stand by me, not behind closed doors, not in whispers, out loud, in front of everyone." He turned to her, finally understanding. She wasn't asking for love. She was asking for truth. By 9 a.m., the executive floor at Blackwell Industries was humming with tension. Clara walked through it like a ghost, seen but unacknowledged. Eyes flicked toward her, conversations paused mid-sentence. She knew what they were thinking. She'd seen the whispers before. But this time, they were louder, sharper. She didn't flinch. She just kept walking, spine straight, until she reached the elevator that would take her to the top. Ethan was already in the boardroom when she arrived. He stood at the head of the long, polished table, flanked by the company's most powerful voices: legal counsel, investor relations, department heads. The air reeked of sterile aggression. No one looked happy. Clara slid into the last empty chair. She didn't greet anyone. She didn't need to. Arthur, ever the calm eye in the storm, opened the meeting. Let's get straight to it. The photo caused backlash. There's media speculation about workplace misconduct, preferential treatment, personal entanglements. Some investors are spooked. He looked at Ethan. They want a statement, preferably today. Ethan said nothing at first. Then, calmly, I'll issue one. Murmurs spread across the table. I'll acknowledge the relationship, he added, and I'll take full responsibility. No policy was violated. No influence was misused. I asked Clara Jensen to dinner of my own accord. I kissed her. I pursued her. She owes none of you an explanation. That silenced the room, but not for long. Marjorie Tan, head of compliance, narrowed her eyes. This opens the company to a precedent. How do we protect ourselves from future claims? What if someone alleges bias? Then they can come to me, Ethan replied. I won't hide behind HR language. This is reckless, another board member snapped. You're emotional. You're compromising the company. Clara spoke before she could stop herself. No, he's being honest. And for the first time, that's what this company needs. Heads turned. I didn't seduce him, she continued. I didn't manipulate my way into his office or his life. I did my job. I earned his trust. And somewhere along the line, that turned into something neither of us expected. But it doesn't make me weak, and it doesn't make him incompetent. Arthur raised a brow. You understand what you're inviting, Ms. Jensen. I understand what it means to be seen as the problem just for existing, Clara replied. So go ahead, fire me, frame it however you want, but I'm not ashamed. Ethan stood taller. And neither am I. The board fell quiet again. Arthur leaned back. So what happens now? Now, Ethan said, I do the one thing I've never done in this room. What's that? Marjorie asked. Tell the truth, he said. I built this company to avoid the chaos of human error. I created a culture that prioritized control over connection. That ends today. If I lose investors for being human, then I lose them. But I will not sacrifice Clara to maintain the illusion of detachment. The room sat with that. Then Arthur cleared his throat. Well, that was unexpected. A few chuckles broke the tension, just slightly. We'll draft a controlled statement, he said, and you two will stay out of headlines. For the next 6 months, understood? Ethan nodded. Clara did too. The meeting adjourned. Ethan didn't speak until they were alone in his office. He closed the door, leaned back against it, and exhaled. I think that's the first time I've ever lost control. In a meeting. Clara stepped closer. No, that's the first time you took control. He looked at her, really looked. You didn't have to defend me. I wasn't defending you, she said. I was defending us. He took her, had this time no hesitation. Then let's stop hiding everywhere. Starting now? She asked. He nodded. Starting with this. And then he kissed her again. Not behind closed doors, but with the blinds wide open and the city watching. The boardroom battle was over, but neither Ethan nor Clara felt victorious. A strange stillness followed their public admission, as if the entire building had paused, waiting to see what they would do next. There were no grand gestures, no sudden applause, just silence, observation, and whispers that would grow louder before they ever died down. The following days felt surreal. For the first time, Ethan and Clara moved through the office without pretending. No more stolen glances, no more brushing hands under conference tables. Still, they kept their distance, respectful, professional. They had declared their relationship, but the truth was, they didn't yet know how to live it. Ethan struggled more than he admitted. He found himself questioning every interaction, every smile from a co-worker, every extra second Clara spent. With Max in the hallway, he hated it, hated the doubt, the way it made him feel small, but he also knew where it came from. Lillian, the wound that still ached even after all these years. Clara noticed. She always did. One evening, as they left the building together, she stopped him just outside the revolving doors. "You're pulling away again," she said. "I'm not," he replied automatically. "Ethan," he exhaled. "I don't know how to do this. Be seen. Be vulnerable. It feels like I'm waiting for the next hit." Clara touched his cheek, soft, grounding. "Then let it hit. And when it does, we brace together." Later that night, Ethan invited her to his apartment, not for dinner or distraction, but for clarity. He wanted her in his space, his real space, the one untouched by investors or headlines. It was minimalist, cold in its elegance. Clara wandered through the rooms, noticing the books arranged by height, the sterile kitchen, the absence of photographs. "This doesn't feel like a home," she said quietly. Ethan stood behind her. "It hasn't been. Not for a long time." "Why?" she asked. "Because I didn't think I deserved one." She turned to him, eyes soft. "You do now. If you want it." That night they didn't touch out of passion. They held each other out of need, out of the desperate, quiet acknowledgement that neither of them had any idea what came next, but they couldn't do it alone. The next morning, Clara woke first. She padded barefoot through the apartment searching for coffee. That's when she found it, a small locked drawer in Ethan's study left slightly ajar. Inside, a photo of him and a woman, Lillian. She didn't take it, didn't snoop, but the image burned itself into her mind. The woman was beautiful, poised, and Ethan was younger, softer, open. Later she didn't bring it up, but Ethan saw the question in her eyes. "Do you still love her?" she asked finally, as they stood in the soft morning light. He didn't answer right away. "I don't know if I ever did," he said. "I think I loved the version of me I thought I was with her. The man who didn't know better." Clara nodded. "And who are you now?" He stepped closer, kissed her forehead, still figuring that out. But beneath the quiet was a truth neither had yet said aloud. Love wasn't safe. It was a choice, made daily. And some days, that choice would be harder than others. It happened on a Thursday, a day so ordinary it almost felt staged. Clara had just returned from lunch when she saw the message on Ethan's assistant's screen. Lillian Roth, confirmed for 3:30 appointment. She stopped mid-step, the name wrapping itself around her spine like ice. Lillian, not an email, not a memory. Flesh, bone, breath. Here. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She turned on her heel and headed straight for Ethan's office. He was mid-call, but the look on her face ended it instantly. "She's coming," Clara said. Ethan's mouth twitched. "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wasn't sure I'd let her in." Clara crossed her arms. "And now?" Ethan looked at her. Steady, distant. "Now I have to." At exactly 3:30 she arrived. Lillian Roth walked into Blackwell Industries wearing a red dress and confidence like armor. She looked every inch the myth Clara had imagined. Graceful, deliberate, perfectly controlled. But when she saw Ethan, something flickered in her expression. Surprise, or maybe just recognition of the man she'd once dismantled. "Ethan," she said with a faint smile, "you look older." "And you look rehearsed," he replied. Clara watched from the hallway. She wasn't supposed to be there, but she couldn't look away. Lillian glanced at the office interior, then back at Ethan. "Can we speak privately?" "No," he said. "Anything you have to say, you can say with her nearby." He nodded toward the doorway where Clara stood. "She stays," Lillian's smile twitched. "Very well." She sat, crossed her legs. "I came to apologize." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That's a decade late." "I know," she replied, "but it matters, at least to me." Clara stepped further into the room, silent. Lillian noticed. "You're the assistant." Clara didn't flinch. "I'm Clara." "Of course." Lillian turned back to Ethan. "I left you because I was scared of becoming irrelevant. I thought power was something you stole, not something you built. I was wrong." Ethan leaned forward, voice razor-sharp. "You didn't just leave, you broke something. You made me believe that connection was weakness, that love was a transaction." "I know," Lillian whispered. The room went quiet. Clara expected Ethan to scream, to throw her out, but he just sat there, calm, unshaken. "I forgave you," he said, "years ago, but I never forgot, and I never trusted again." Lillian stood. "Then maybe I did teach you something after all." She left without another word. When the door closed, Clara finally breathed. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "No," Ethan replied, "but I'm not broken either." They stood there for a long moment. Then Clara reached for his hand. "Thank you for not hiding me." "I thought she'd be the hardest ghost to face," Ethan said. "Turns out silence was harder." That night, Ethan didn't work late. He didn't sit at his desk and dissect emotions into numbers. He took Clara home, and for once, he didn't look over his shoulder. Ethan had always designed his life in quarters, fiscal years, growth charts, projections. Everything was planned, even his grief, especially his distance. But Clara didn't fit into a spreadsheet. She didn't obey formulas or forecasts. She was unpredictable, emotional, bold, and now she was permanent, if he let her be. They spent the next few days in quiet proximity. No scandals, no press, just normalcy. But it didn't feel simple. Every silence between them carried the weight of choices still undecided. Ethan would catch her watching him sometimes, not with suspicion, but with caution, like she was waiting for the part where he vanished again. He couldn't blame her. One morning, Clara stood by his kitchen counter, coffee in hand, her posture unusually stiff. "I've been offered a promotion," she said. Ethan looked up from his tablet. "Promotion? Different company, creative director. Better pay, more control." She sipped her drink, avoiding his eyes. "And fewer people." Whispering behind my back, Ethan set the tablet down. "Do you want it?" "I don't know." "Is this because of me?" "It's because of us," she said. "Because I don't want to live half visible. I want a life where I don't have to wait for someone else to decide I'm enough." Her words struck deeper than any insult ever had. Ethan stood. "Then let's build that life." Clara stared at him, unsure if she heard him correctly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Ethan began, voice thick with something unfamiliar, "that I can't imagine another quarter, another year, another day pretending this doesn't matter. I love you, and I'm done rationing that love like it's a liability." She set the mug down. "You're serious?" "I've never been more. But love doesn't erase history. It challenges it." Later that day, Ethan took a walk through his old neighborhood, the one he left behind when success became more important than memory. He walked past the small bookstore where he once hid from the world. The park bench where he kissed Lillian for the first time, the alleyway where he signed his first contract. Everything felt smaller now. But Clara, she made the world feel larger. When he returned to the office, he called Arthur. "I'm stepping down," he said. Arthur blinked. "I beg your pardon. I've built the machine. It can run without me now. I'm not leaving entirely, but I'm done being the face, the brand, the cage." Arthur leaned back. "Is this because of her?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, and also because of me. I want a life." Arthur stood, extended his hand. "Took you long enough." That night, Ethan found Clara on the rooftop of her apartment. She looked out over the city like it was something she didn't quite belong to anymore. He stepped behind her, slipping his arms around her waist. "I stepped down," he whispered. She turned, startled. "What?" "I made space," he said, "for us, for the life you said you wanted, because I want it too." Her eyes filled. "You gave it up?" "No," he said. "I gave it back, so I could finally have something worth keeping." They kissed, not like it was a finale, but like it was a beginning, because it was. The wedding wasn't large, it wasn't loud, no grand ballroom, no press, no pretense. Just 30 guests in a garden nestled behind an old museum, where the air smelled like lavender and late summer. Clara walked barefoot down the grass aisle, laughing quietly when her heels sank in the dirt. Ethan waited for her in a navy suit. Not black, not corporate, with his hands shaking just enough to remind himself he was alive. Max officiated. Of course he did. No one else had been there from the first accidental touch to this moment. He kept the ceremony short, said things like, "They're both too stubborn for fairy tales, but just vulnerable enough for forever." Clara couldn't stop smiling. Ethan, for once, didn't hide behind silence. His vows were short, but the most human words he'd ever spoken. "I spent my whole life trying not to feel. Then you touched my hand and ruined everything, and thank God you did, because I wasn't living before you." She kissed him before Max could finish. The reception was just dinner, under twinkling lights, with mismatched chairs and a jazz trio that played off-key more than once. No one cared. There was dancing. Clara pulled Ethan into the center even though he protested. "I don't dance," he whispered. "You do now," she whispered back. And he did. Not well, but beautifully. At one point, Lillian arrived, uninvited, unannounced. She stood at the edge of the garden in a muted grey dress, hands folded. Ethan saw her. So did Clara. But neither approached, not out of cruelty, but out of closure. Lillian smiled once, then turned and left. No drama, just history waving goodbye. Later that night, back in their new apartment, not his, not hers, but theirs, Clara found Ethan on the balcony. No suit, just jeans. He was barefoot, staring at the skyline. "You okay?" she asked. He turned, smiled. "I'm happy, and I don't know what to do with that yet." She joined him, rested, her head on his shoulder. "You hold it. And when it starts to feel heavy, you let me help carry it." He looked down at her, quiet. "Do you think it'll last?" he asked. "No," she said. "Not every second, not every day. But the parts that matter? Yeah, I do." He kissed her forehead, then lips, then whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." "I never could," she said, "even when I should have." They stood there until the city lights dimmed and the world softened around them. Because love, when it's real, doesn't need grand finales, it just needs to be chosen, again and again and again. Wow, what a story, right? I'd love to hear what you thought. Drop a comment, rate it from 1 to 10, and tell me where you're watching from. And hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out the other stories we have on the channel. There's so much more waiting for you.